Hi everyone, I'm Nick from Coffee Before Arch, and today we're going to be going over functions in this episode of Python 3 Crash Course. So, what is a function? So, functions are a way that we can reduce the amount of repeated code that we have in a script. So, if we have a bunch of things that we need to do, and we need to maybe do that procedure of things many times, or even just a couple times, depending on how large the actual thing we need to do is. A lot of times it's easier if we just say, what if I could just replace this with one line here, have one implementation, and then just add that one line wherever I need that procedure done. Now, that's called a function. So let's jump into our example. So this time we'll implement 4 different functions, and they're for printing out different numbers of arguments. So here we have a function that we first define using def, that keyword, and then print none, and then just open and close parentheses and then a colon. Now this says when I say print done, when I type this in to our script without the colon, when I type that in, it will do whatever is right here. So whatever is after this colon, and then this comes into something we haven't looked at before, which is kind of indentation. So this kind of sets apart what belongs to what. So kind of like you have a tree and you have different branches. So when we indent, we say that everything here belongs to, say, this print function. So everything that's one tab over in this case. And then we can kind of nest these, so we can actually have multiple different layers of indentation. Not so much with definitions of functions, but usually we have that with other things like conditional statements, where we're checking if some condition is true. We might want to check if another condition is true as well. But for now, here we have this print none function. It has no arguments, so just empty parentheses, and then it will just print no arguments. Now we can also pass arguments to a print function. So this function called print1, we just give it a argument name. It doesn't have to have any significant, or it doesn't have to have, it can be whatever name that we choose. In this case, it makes sense to kind of call it arg1, and then it will print arg1. We can also have multiple arguments. So print2 does exactly that, where we have arg1 and arg2, and then we print arg1 and arg2. Now, when we call these functions, we don't need to give specific names for arg1 and arg2. So our names in the rest of our program don't have to be arg1 and arg2. We could say print A and B, or print2 and call it with A and B. And then A and B, when they're called in the function, will be known as arg1 and arg2. So we'll see examples of that in just a little bit. And then let's say that we have something where we have we don't know how many arguments we're going to have. In this case, we can use this star args. So this says I will have a variable number of arguments that will get passed in. So here we'll print out first args by itself, which will be kind of like argv when we get in command line inputs, that we had a variable length of inputs from the command line, and that would size the array depending on how many things we passed in. Args is the same way, but this time it's what we pass into this function. So we'll print out that array, and then this time we have to be pretty careful with this, and we should do some checking, which we'll get into later on, but for now we'll just assume that it's called with 3 arguments. Remember, we don't need to specify 3, because this could be any number, but in this case implicitly it will be 3, and so we'll call arg1, arg2, and arg3. We'll unpack those out of args, and then we'll go ahead and print those 3. So then down here we'll just call each of these functions, and remember, to call them, all we have to do is the name of the function, and then the parentheses, and then within the parentheses it's the arguments. So in this case, print none doesn't have any arguments, so we just call it without any. Print1 takes 1 argument, and we could pass in a variable, or in this case, this single string will count as a variable, where it'll count, this single string will be that arg1 in that print1 function. Then we'll do it with 2 more strings with print2. And then finally with print any, meaning any number of arguments, we'll call it with 3. So let's go ahead and run this. So we'll run it as always with Python3 and functions.py. So here we have a print from our function with no arguments. We have one with a single argument, 2 arguments. Then we see we print out that star args that we have as our variable number of arguments. And we see that it packs these 3 arguments together as separate strings, and then we unpack those and print it. So that's going to do it for today. That's kind of a brief introduction to functions and just kind of how they can be useful if we don't want to have to say, instead of writing, maybe 3 print statements, we can call that print with star args as an argument, and we save 2 lines of code every single time. As always, all of the code that we worked on today is available at github.com/coffeebeforearch. There's a link in the description below, and I'm Nick, and I hope you have a nice day.